It's gone now. Perfect. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to the Society of Graduate Students VP Advocacy, Chair Chung, for land acknowledgement and trigger warning.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here today to present the land acknowledgement, which allows us to meaningfully reflect on our relationships with the original caretakers of this land that Western University is built upon. Today, we are gathered on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chenongton nations on lands connected with the London Township and Zomba Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. In the region, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. The Society of Graduate Students values the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and all of the original peoples of Turtle Island. We recognize the inequalities that pervade the Indigenous communities. This includes, but does not pertain to, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, residential schools, boiling water advisories, and policies such as the Indian Act, which continue to marginalize Indigenous communities. We acknowledge settler colonial violence as the root cause of overrepresentation of Indigenous people among those with disabilities. This includes both physical and mental health disabilities as a direct result of being kept separate from their traditional lifeways. Moreover, settler colonial violence continues to prevent Indigenous access to safe healthcare, both in terms of physical distance, but also in terms of physical danger. Finally, we recognize that colonial violence and racism have made Indigenous peoples underrepresented in higher education, particularly in graduate school. The Accessibility Commission at the Society of Graduate Students is dedicated to being a partner and a fellow advocate for Indigenous rights to accessible spaces. We welcome the voices of Indigenous peoples and wish to prioritize giving them space to be heard. Our work moving forward aims to make the university more accessible for students with disabilities and for everyone to be able to achieve their graduate school goals. We commit to continue learning, unlearning, and strive towards reconciliation by renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service. Thank you.
Okay, before I get into it, I've heard an accessibility feedback that this monitor guy is in the way and also super awkward. So I'm going to move the entire podium. Oh, that was easier than I thought. So, am I right? Okay, is that a bit better for everyone right now? Yeah, I'm seeing nodding. It's a good sign. And now I move the mic. Any other accessibility things right off the bat that we can fix? We're looking good? Excellent. All right, so just a few more accessibility and housekeeping notes before we get into opening remarks. Real-time closed captioning is available both online and in person through Zoom and via stream text for those who prefer their captions on an additional device. If you need that link, please just hunt me down and I will get it to you. We are joined by our American Sign Language interpreters, Dean, Janice, and Aaron, who will be pinned on Zoom so we can see them both online and on the main screen in person. I'm going to take a moment to get that little thing off the screen that's been there for a good while. Huh, cool. You ever almost break technology at a rented venue? Anyone else ever experienced that? This is stop number 7 and I still, I unbreak it. Kings don't sue me. That's a joke legally. Anyways, back to it. So that fixes that. And then speakers, please be mindful of our interpreters and captioners while you're presenting. Easier said than done. I know I talk really fast usually. And also please do take off your mask and social distance when speaking to facilitate lip reading. Accessible washrooms are located To the left, all the way across the building, not a very far walk, about 1 minute or less, and there is a universal washroom, so gender neutral and fully accessible. We do have some prepackaged lunches for all in-person participants and event staff today. Please eat them. Elizabeth, I see your hand is up. Oh. Wow, that I will repeat that now for our online friends and anyone using captioning. So for the Braille, for the washrooms, it just says washroom. It doesn't say like women's washroom, man's washroom. So women's washroom's on the left and man's washroom's on the right. And then to the left of both of those is the gender neutral washroom. Wow. Kings, fix your Braille. Ouch. So again, we do have prepackaged lunches. Please eat them. For every tour stop, I slowly get more and more desperate and beg you to take the lunches home. At some stops, I have kind of like stood at the door and made people bring them home. So we can all avoid that if you cooperate early on. You think I'm kidding, but you know I'm not. Anyways, when eating, please do try to socially distance as best as you can. This is a pretty massive venue and there's a lot of space outside, so hopefully that's not too hard. COVID-19, still a thing. I will say I'm recovering from a case, like I'm negative, but I am recovering, so I might have to catch my breath a few times. But otherwise, please do wear a mask if you can. We want this to be a safe and inclusive environment for everyone, including immunocompromised people like myself. We do have hand sanitizer and masks available at the registration table, and we will be conducting contact tracing if any participant contracts COVID-19 within the next few days. If this is unfortunately the case for anyone, please do just contact me at carly.fox@neads.ca or any of our social media so we can inform the other participants. Sarah? Oh, brutal. How about now? Oh, good catch. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, again, like if there's ever an issue, just put up a hand, yell, do your thing, and we will do your best to fix it. Lovely, thank you. And again, this is a buy-in for space, so you are among your peers, maybe even friends at the end of the day. Let's see where it goes. So please do feel free to do whatever you need to get comfortable and enjoy the event, whether that's stimming, moving around in the back of the room, taking a nap. Probably going to do that. I'm doing that. Leaving for sensory decompression whenever you need it. Just don't be shy. And if you have any unaddressed accessibility needs, questions, concerns, please find me or a NEADS team member and we will gladly help you out. I'll now turn it over to opening remarks to be completely unserious. Thank you for laughing. That was going to be really weird if no one laughed. I just realized I've been calling someone for 5 minutes. Anyways, completely unserious. Jen said, buy-in for organization. So with housekeeping taken care of, I'm so excited to welcome everyone to the National Educational Association of Disabled Students State of the Schools Tours London, Ontario Encore in partnership with Western University's Society of Graduate Students. We have a jam-packed schedule and an all-star lineup of speakers, so I will try to keep the opening remarks as short as possible while also telling you everything you need to know about NEADS, why we're here, where we've been, and what you can expect from today. So, NEADS is a national buy-in for cross-disability charitable organization supporting full access to education and employment for disabled post-secondary students and graduates. That means we as an organization are made up of disabled, neurodivergent, chronically ill, mad post-secondary students and graduates from all across the country. And we all work to represent you at local, provincial, and national levels. So our work covers 3 strategic areas of debt reduction, experiences in class and on campus, and employment. We offer a ton of events, resources, reports, financial assistance programs, and very cool, exciting opportunities. I will let my colleagues, Chloe and Kaya, cover that a little bit later and break the water. Take what you need, am I right? Yeah, COVID recovery is no joke, team. Anyways, So I'm going to skip all my stuff about like our projects because I trust my colleagues will cover that very well. But I do just want to quickly discuss our Virtual Access for All project. So it is generously funded by Employment and Social Development Canada's Goal Getters program. And we just found out we've been renewed for another 2 years, which means this project is back on the road for another 2 years. They told me this 2 days ago, so I'm still just processing. Thank you for the clapping. And so part of the Virtual Access for All project is our State of the Schools tour. So basically, this tour has been a hybrid cross-Canada tour where we visit disabled student groups where they are. And that's been going on since November, and it's going on for another 2 years. Whew. Anyway, so besides being asked to do a tour, we really wanted to do this to meet disabled students where they're at, to gain a better understanding of local and regional issues they face, and to inform our State of the Schools reports through the incredible student advocacy we have seen at every single stop. I'll now tell you about the tour, and it has been a ride. So the tour began in St. John's, Newfoundland, in partnership with Memorial University Newfoundland's Disability Inclusion Service Center. Here we learned about the unique transportation and built environment barriers that St. John's geography presented. We also saw strong student union support for the Disability Student Center and disability representation throughout the student union, not just in disability-specific goals. In what can only be called an essential team building activity, the NEADS team did get screeched in. We then traveled to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where we partnered with Dalhousie Accessibility and Inclusion Society and met their vibrant network of on-campus disabled student groups, including the Schulich Disability Alliance and Disability Advocacy Society. There we really heard firsthand how a lack of educational accommodation services harms academic outcomes, and how a severe lack of financial assistance paired with an increasing cost of living crisis harms all aspects of student well-being. This talk really stuck with me because of how dedicated these student advocates were and how willing and open they were to share their lived experience with us. We then visited the organizational hometown of Ottawa, where NEADS is based out of, in partnership with Carleton Disability Awareness Center and CU Care, a student movement advocating for the continuation of Carleton's attendance services program, the only one of its kind in all of Canada. Here we really understood the importance of grassroots, disabled student advocacy, and we saw how impactful their organizing was through the successful reinstallation of the attendance services program. I also got this cool fidget ring, and I've brought it everywhere with me ever since. If I lose this, I'll be a mess. I will leave the tour as a joke. I love this tour. Anyways, we then visited our good friends ACAPS. I'll say their French title real quick. L'Association Québécoise pour l'équité et l'inclusion au postsecondaire, or the Québécoise Association for Equity and Inclusion in Post-Secondary, all the way in Montreal. This was a really great opportunity to learn more about how provincial funding really shapes available opportunities and resources for disabled students. We also learned more about Francophone culture of Down disability and had the pleasure to learn more about the first ever Francophone disability post-secondary program in the world. Sorry, I'm just doing something in the chat. Oh, cute. We're good. And then we flew all the way out to Victoria, BC, where we met with our longtime partners, the UVic Society for Students with Disabilities. SSD showed us the potential disabled student groups have to provide resources and programming for the disabled student community with the right supports. And this includes a food bank, COVID-19 supply distribution, and peer support. A panel between disabled students and professors really explored the nuances and challenges behind the push to return to campus. And student advocacy really emphasized the importance of addressing the housing and affordability crisis. We were coincidentally there for cherry blossom season, which was very cool. I accidentally hiked 7 kilometers and I have arthritis, so that was not my best moment. We then we wrapped up the tour in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in partnership with the University of Winnipeg Student Association's Access Lounge. We also hosted the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities and the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, which showed how essential Winnipeg has been in the disability rights movement and provided a better understanding of the many available opportunities for youth to get more involved in disabled persons organizations, otherwise known as DPOs. Ironically, this was the largest gathering of Western University students right up until this tour stop, with 3 whole people. You guys are everywhere. So a lot has changed over the last few months, and there are clear regional differences, but three things have been made exceptionally clear. Disabled students continue to be excluded from return to campus plans, ignored in decision-making processes, and pushed out of education due to systemic ableism. Back in August, NEADS launched the Back to School National Advocacy Campaign, which followed disabled students across the country throughout the fall 2022 term as we navigated the push to return to in-person learning, the massive rollback of hybrid and online accessibility, and the removal of COVID-19 vaccine and mask mandates. So this is not over. A new iteration of the campaign is on its way as we aim to provide a national advocacy platform to disabled students to voice their experiences, opinions, and perspectives on the state of post-secondary education. And again, as I found out only 2 days ago, the tour is not over. I'm really excited. I'm just a little tired today. So the Virtual Access for All project, again, has been extended yet another 2 years with more State of the Schools tour stops to be confirmed. So please do stay tuned for that. So that's a bit about who we are as an organization. And now I just want to quickly introduce the NEADS tour team to you all, because I think they're cool. So in person with us today, we have 2 Western University students. No cheering for Western? Is it because we're Kings? Okay, go Western, yeah. So we got Chloe Gooden-Jacques, NEADS research consultant who is pursuing their PhD in education here at Western and is a lead consultant at Chloe Catherine Consulting. You'll hear more from her during the NEADS presentation. We also have Elizabeth Moeller, a research consultant who is a doctoral candidate here at Western University in the Health and Rehabilitation Sciences program, where she explores how direct funding impacts disabled people. You'll hear more from her as she moderates one of our panels today.
Kylie, could you speak a little bit slower, please, for the interpreters? Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thanks again. So Kagan Newman, our Student Awards Programs Director, Logistics Wizard, and Honorary Travel Agent. Thanks for all the work you do. She has her master's in grant writing and program evaluation from Concordia University, Chicago, and can crush a 10-kilometer hike, no problem. She scares me. You've also heard from our researcher, Sarah Shumsonsky, who is wrapping up her bachelor in applied linguistics and discourse studies with a minor in disability studies at Carleton. They have the coolest courses, and I am so jealous. Online, we have Alan Bridgman. He is our general tech expert and Zoom moderator. Alan is a Winnipeg local and was really helpful navigating that tour stop with a very inaccessible and confusing campus. We also have our national coordinator, Craig Smith, who is hanging out somewhere on Zoom. I try to get him to come to these in person because I think he's neat. He keeps saying no. Please do pressure and bully him into coming to the next one. It's a plan? Awesome. Frank was actually here in 1986 when NEADS was officially founded, and he has been nationally coordinating ever since. Finally, I'm Carly Fox. My pronouns are she, her, elle, and I'm a queer, neurodivergent, and disabled U Ottawa student and NEADS Communications and Partnerships Director. I've talked so much already, but you're stuck with me on emceeing our event today. And I'll now hand it over to Elizabeth Moeller, who is SOGS VP Academic for her. Oh, wow, I lied to everyone. I'll hand it over to my colleagues, Chloe and Katya, to discuss these awesome projects and initiatives before our first break. I'm sorry, it was a prank. I see Elizabeth running into the building. Chloe, Katya, if you guys want to come on up. I've got to download the music. I could ad-lib. I cannot ad-lib. I will say, I grew up in London, Ontario, so coming back here for work's really weird. It's taking everything I have not to make London, Ontario jokes, and you know I have a ton. I lived here for I would say 15 good years, and there are a lot of jokes. I haven't seen one goose on this campus. Where did they go? Why are they not hurting me? Oh, good job. Who booked Kings? Katya, thanks for booking Kings and keeping us away from the geese. Okay, I'm gonna move all the stuff now, but thank you for listening to my ad-libs. Okay, you're coming up good.
Hello. Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry, everyone. I just need to pull up some tech real quick. Talk amongst yourself. Make a new friend. We're all making friends. Someone just did that. Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Yes. I think of you. No. Yeah. Okay. Like, take this time over. Okay. Okay. You can see. No. Okay. I have your my name is Chloe and I'm focused on RCND. I have an education and research consultant with NEADS as well as almost 2 year doctoral student as well. I completed my undergraduate studies here at King's and it's always so great to return to this wonderful community. I consider myself as a work career settler that ultimately signifies that I benefit from research and resources generated and disseminated by First Nations, media, and NEADS
indigenous, disabled persons, as well as disability people.
Thanks for that, Chloe. And as Carly mentioned, my name is Katya, and I am the Financial Assistance Programs Director at NEADS. I have I have a diploma in child and youth work, as well as a bachelor's degree in social work from Carleton, and just recently graduated with my master's in grant writing and nonprofit management from Concordia University of Chicago. And today, Chloe and I will just be providing a little bit more of an in-depth overview of what NEADS does, and some of our work over the past year.
So, as Carly mentioned, the National Education Association of Disabled Children NEADS is a boy and for cross-disability cross Canada charitable organization devoting full access to education and employment for disabled children. Disabled voluntary students and graduates working across 3 strategic areas of self-production, experience in class and on campus, and employment. NEADS offers a variety of investigators, remote financial assistance programs, and opportunities for both disabled students and graduates to improve opportunities in higher education and labor market. We collaborate with both secondary stakeholders, other non-governmental organizations, employers, disability service providers, and community members. We provide ongoing advice to employment and social development Canada and provincial territorial government, as well as work to promote government programs and services that support higher education for disabled people.
As you heard a little bit about from Carly already, the Virtual Access for All project was a 2-year project that began in 2021. It's generously funded through Employment and Social Development Canada supports for student learning programs. The overarching goal of the project was to support students with the transition to post-secondary education. And the main pillars or priorities of the project were to connect students with existing mentoring opportunities and resources, offer monthly webinars on different accessibility related topics, offer these in-person tour stops, expand the NEADS National Student Awards Program, and fund our Accessibility Resilience Program, both of which I'll talk about a little bit later on. These programs are very important because students with disabilities face a number of systemic barriers in accessing their education as well as entering the labor market. And projects like these make a huge difference in making sure that students are provided with resources that will allow them to be successful in their post-secondary education and successfully transition to the world of work.
President of schools report on the possible fire virtual access for all projects. The aim to provide information on current trends and changes in post-secondary education, particularly those affected by the continued repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic. Past reports can be located on our Disability Awards.ca website, and related to that is the state of the school tour, with accommodations of the government. Yeah. Okay, we will move on. One of our newest projects at NEADS is the building employment pathways for people with disabilities that began in February of this year. This process was funded by Employment and Social Development Canada's Workplace Opportunities, removing barriers to equity program or work as regardless with identified barriers, needs, and best practices for accessible employment within the postal and career service sector, with a focus on Canada Post. This project will also strive to increase the percentage of persons with disability employed in various roles throughout Canada Post. This project will offer students and graduates with disability, the opportunity to receive holistic and personalized employment readiness support that would build the necessary foundation for a successful transition to work. This employment support will be delivered by coaches who will be trained by Sustainable Livelihoods Canada.
So now I'll just talk for a few minutes about our two financial assistance programs. So first we'll chat about the NEADS Student Awards program. This program began in 2007 and is designed to offer tuition support that is paid directly to the post-secondary institution that the student attends to defray the cost of tuition. Between 2007 and 2022, we have provided $687,000 of financial assistance to 228 students across the country. The program has grown to include 7 different award types that range from $1,000 to $10,000. A number of these awards are funded through partnerships. So for example, we have the $10,000 Canada Post Award, 2 $5,000 Accessible Media Incorporated Sir Robert Pearson Memorial Scholarships, 1 $5,000 Connor Clark and Long Financial Group Scholarship. We have our $3,000 NEADS Student Awards, which the number of those that are given out each year varies depending on the amount of available funding. And our remaining 3 awards are our memorial awards. So we have the Memorial Award for the Visually Impaired. We have the Christine Meter Memorial Scholarship, which is given to a graduate student. And we have the Holly Bartlett Memorial Award in memory of Holly, who was one of our past board of directors as was Christine. Now I'll transition to talking a little bit about the Accessibility Resilience Program. This program was created in 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was meant to support students with the extra burdens they were experiencing due to the due to the onset of and the transition to online remote learning. Students found themselves facing issues with rising tuition fees and a lack of transitional supports for the shift to online learning. The program gave out grants of $1,000 or $5,000, and those grants were intended to cover costs associated with such items as assistive technology, ergonomic desk equipment, cables, internet bills, living costs, and other expenses like mental health and wellness costs. The program concluded in December of 2022 due to a depletion of funding, but we're pretty proud that we've been able to, through that program, provide $412,800 of financial assistance to 271 students. And Kylie stole my thunder a little bit with this. But just to mention again that we are incredibly thankful that we will be receiving another 2 years of funding to continue the Virtual Access for All project. I'm very thankful to the Supports for Student Learning program at Employment and Social Development Canada. This extension of funding, which will end in March 2025, will allow us to continue to do a number of important things, including extending these in-person events across the country. It will allow us to continue to offer online webinars on a range of accessibility related topics. We will be able to continue to fund the NEADS Student Awards program. And there is talk of a potential return of the Accessibility Resilience program and or a merger of the two programs. And yeah, we'll continue to be able to produce the State of the Schools reports that contain a lot of valuable information for folks in our community. And yeah, I think we're excited to continue to do what we can to make post-secondary education and employment more accessible.
I think.
Oh my God, my colleagues are so cool. Can we clap again for them? Yes. Also, yeah, Kaya, so sorry to steal your thunder. Kaya was the one who told me that we're doing this for another 2 years, and I'm really excited. But I was told this after coming off another trip, and I'm like, I am so tired. We're going for 2 more years. But I'm sure once I get a bit more energy, I will be just bouncing off the walls again for 2 more years. Very exciting things. Sarah, you're coming with us. Elizabeth, you're coming with us. Hope y'all are free for the next 2 years. We got a lot going on. Anyways, I'll let you guys skedaddle. Excellent as always. I'm going to move around tech, but in the meantime, if Elizabeth Moeller, as SOGS VP Academic, wants to come up, I don't even know if I do the joke where I don't know who you are because you're not repping NEADS right now, but I'm going to let you guys come up and fix the mic. Is this thing on? Thanks. I have to say that at least once, or like I'm pretty sure the tour has to stop or something. Clearly rational. Hello, Steven. Just gonna tap it for you real quick. Tap a letter NG. Sorry, just give me 1 more second. Oh yeah, do some theme music. Get into it. I don't know if SOGS is a theme song, but I think they did it. Sharon thinks I should make the SOGS song. What do you guys think? I think you should do it right now. Hi. Oh, I have your screen ready though. I don't think we'll have to do a theme song this time. All right. Okay. So you want to put your camera down right now? Sorry, your laptop. Right here? Okay. Yeah, there's one laptop. It's pretty left. Oh my God, there's so many laptops. There's so many cameras. Maybe that's the theme. Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Okay, so my name is Elizabeth Moeller. I am the Vice President Academic at SOGS, or the Society of Graduate Students. So what is SOGS? You've been asking and wondering. So the Society of Graduate Students, or SOGS, is the graduate student advocacy organization and student government here at Western University. SOGS represents over 7,000 graduate students across more than 60 disciplines. Started in 1963, SOGS continues to evolve and to grow to better support the needs of our diverse student community of learners.
Council at SOGS is the democratic governing body or House of Commons of the Society. SOGS Council represents all faculties and departments at Western University. SOGS is accountable to its membership. SOGS also owns and operates the Grad Club. Great place on campus. Fun fact, did you know that SOGS was initially a social club that hosted a weekly pub night in the attic of Somerville House? I don't think I've been to the attic. Today, SOGS is much more than a social club, advocating on behalf of students for the best graduate experience possible here at Western University. Like most student organizations, SOGS provides many different services, benefits, and programs to its members, and plays a key role in campus and community affairs and engagement. Another major part of SOGS' mandate is advocacy work, with a particular focus on collective advocacy to improve conditions for SOGS members. SOGS fills an important gap in advocacy and student experience here on our campus. To ensure that SOGS advocates for its diverse membership, SOGS commissioners, accessibility, action, gender concerns, pride, and racial equity and inclusivity connect with the specific constituents to bring issues and concerns to the fore. SOGS has 5 elected positions, and they are President, Vice President Academic, c'est moi, Vice President Advocacy, Sharon, Vice President Student Services, Kesavi Kanagaspe, who could not be here today, and Vice President Finance, Sai, who could not be here as well. Executive members of SOGS act as advocates on various departmental and university-wide committees, and we help create a sense of community on our campus. While not a labor union in its own right, SOGS collects membership dues from over 7,000 graduate students each year, advocating for and representing the interests of thousands of master's and PhD students at Western University. In addition, SOGS joined the Canadian Federation of Students, or CFS. It's an advocacy organization for students as Local 47, and we joined in the 1980s. By paying CFS dues, SOGS members have a voice and collective representation at the national and provincial levels of policy and advocacy work. If you wish to know more, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can ask Sharon or myself today more about SOGS. You can listen to Gradcast, which is our official podcast and radio show of the Society of Graduate Students. Episodes come out every week. You can get them wherever you get your podcasts, or if you really want, listen to Western Radio Wednesday mornings, and you'll hear them there. You can also go to our website at www.sogs.ca. SOGS has some really cool events that I just really want to quickly highlight. We have our Rainbow Coffee Chats that happen the last Monday of the month. Those are really great. We have some events for Pride coming up, so stay tuned. We also have really great chips and chat where you can get together with members of our peer support committee and just chat about grad school, the good, the bad, the ugly. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague Sharon to offer anything that I missed about SOGS. Sharon.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Sharon. Do you want to tell me more about SOGS?
So SOGS is run by also our wonderful staff.
Yes, our staff.
Yes, so I will
great.
talk about Heidi and Raquel and Nick, who are all part of the staff at SOGS, who are very wonderful and support us in any way that they can. And we have, I think you've covered a lot of it, but we do have a lot more exciting events coming up. So with our SAGE coordinator, as well as our sustainability coordinator, who are both part of the advocacy portfolio. They have some strawberry picking going on to speak about how important strawberry is in Indigenous cultures. And the sustainability committee, who does cleanups every month and also has a garden at Western. But I think that is everything.
Hey, did you know SOGS has scholarships? Yeah. So we have a 125th scholarship. That's for people who pay more in tuition than they get in funding. We also have a wonderful academic joint fund. So if you want to do a cool project on campus with your department, look at the criteria for that. And we also have travel awards. Sharon, do you want to go on a trip?
Yes, I would love to.
Let's do it. And then we'll get a SOGS travel award.
I think that sounds wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that's it. Give it up. I am so used to seeing Elizabeth in like NEADS roles, and I'm like, who are you?
You're a different person. I'm kidding. They're so cool. That made me want to be a graduate student. What an idea. Anyways, we're going to break till 1:20. Please do enjoy some of those prepackaged lunches. I hear there's a waterfall or something. Good luck, but there's not a waterfall. Well, yeah, isn't it supposed to be? Waterfall. We're going on a break until 1:20, and I'll see you all back here. I mean, I should have prepared one, yeah. Alan, you can stop the recording if you want. I am going to take a nap now. Oh, yeah, there's a. Yeah.
And Erica, PhD, is an assistant professor of disability studies here at King's at Western University, where she teaches classes on disability theory, policy, and healthcare, and systems navigation. A neurodivergent occupational therapist and former personal care attendant, Dr. Katzman learned about disability through experience before formal education. Her research focuses on the everyday work that disabled people perform to survive life and in inaccessible space, and in pursuit of rights and justice. Dr. Katzman strives to create safe and equitable spaces in teaching, research, and beyond by centering disabled knowledge and practice. So, Michaela, would you like to introduce Danielle? Oh, you don't have that info. Okay, no worries whatsoever. I will introduce Dr. Danielle Cheyne. So Danielle Cheyne is an accessibility counselor at Fanshawe College, an ADHD coach, and a former professor. She has a degree in critical disability studies, a master's of education, and a postgrad certificate as a learning disability and ADHD specialist. I think I promoted you and gave you a PhD with a focus on specific learning strategies. She has combined type ADHD and a teenage daughter with the same diagnosis. She is passionate about equity, diversity, and inclusion in the education system and space, and is a strong advocate for students with disabilities. Danielle has a special interest in neurodivergence and supports many people with ADHD to celebrate their brains and to thrive in systems that are not set up for them. So with that, I would like to allow Dr. Erica Katzman to start us off by giving us a little bit of an overview of some of the work that you do and telling us a little bit about who you are.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, I think there's a third panelist. Heather Hill?
Hi, I'm here online.
Heather's online? I apologize.
I mean, I can just talk. I don't know what if Heather has. So this. You do it. Sorry. Yes, please. I don't.
Turn on my mic. Okay, so I apologize, Dr. Hill. Heather Hill is an associate professor in Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western University. She is the current graduate chair of the Masters of Library and Information Sciences program at FIMS. Her research focuses on public libraries and accessibility for people with disabilities. She has looked at the accessibility of websites, talked to library staff about the accessibility of their libraries, looked at how disability is talked about on library websites, analyzed guiding policies on providing accessible services in libraries, and she's looked at the accessibility of library social media feeds. Her hobbies include chasing her husky mixed dog and providing a comfortable lap for her cat. And Heather, we have something in common. She drinks way too much coffee. Kindred spirits. Okay, so I will turn it over first to Erica Katzman to talk a little bit about her work and talk about how she brings UDL into her classroom.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. Erica here. I thought I would start out by, I guess, elaborating a little bit on how I think about ableism. I think it's a little bit different than how ableism gets talked about sometimes. So I find that often when we think about these like quote unquote isms or oppressions, our minds go straight to these intentional actions, things like harassment or conscious acts of discrimination. And while these certainly can and do happen on our campuses, I also like to encourage thinking about these sort of more pervasive aspects of ableism that show up in systems and in our culture. For folks that don't experience ableism in these ways, I think it can be pretty hard to recognize, but for those of us that do experience ableism in this way, we know it can be extremely harmful, preventing equitable participation and causing deeper harms by really grating away at our sense of belonging, of value, and of self. In the ways that I think about teaching and research, I recognize that these kinds of ableism show up on our campuses just in the ways that we expect and anticipate and celebrate very specific ways of knowing and doing. We anticipate these particular kinds of bodies and minds. And in anticipating these sort of normative bodies and minds, really fail to plan for bodies and minds that fall outside of these cultural and social norms. This kind of ableism, I think, shows up when we treat disability as an afterthought, this kind of unexpected add-on. And so for a lot of people in these spaces, people who maybe don't come with lived experience with disability, accessibility gets understood first and foremost as a legal obligation, something that we have to accommodate. And I find that framing access in that way can really stifle creativity in the ways that we approach access, and really prevents opportunities to know disability differently. So what we end up with then are sort of these academic spaces where disabled people are welcome, certainly, but are not usually actively and excitedly welcomed. And that this sort of diversity, inclusion conversation that we're having more and more that's striving to increase representation is certainly important, but it's really limited as long as we're not looking at these structural forms of ableism and the ways that our culture continues to view disability, disabled students, and including also staff and faculty as not productive enough or somewhat burdensome in the way that we're always, peskily asking for accommodations and competing for these precious resources. So the way that I approach equitable access is really to try and create safe spaces by working through an ideological shift in the way that we understand disability. So pushing back against that construction of disability as lack, and instead really emphasizing the unique advantages and the value that that disabled community members contribute to all of the spaces that we inhabit. So that means in an academic and in other contexts, really trying to get beyond an accommodation model, because the accommodation model is about fitting these supposedly different people into institutional norms. And a different way we can go about that is to try and recognize where and how ableism is baked into these norms and to work on changing those. It means really recognizing that a lot of our conventions are in fact conventions. They're cultural norms, they're practices, traditions that are, they're changeable. So I've been teaching at King's and at Western for about 7 years now. And in that time, I have learned through experience, through interactions with hundreds of students at this point, about the ways that the accommodation model falls short. And I wanted to share just one story that sort of captured this for me, or really got me thinking differently about access. So I taught a deaf student, and over the course of the term, I noticed that she was just outstanding in her in-class contributions. So when we would have dialogue and she would communicate using, with the support of an ASL interpreter, she was just right on with her demonstration of her understanding of what we were talking about in the class. And then on a written assignment, that same depth of understanding just really wasn't coming through. And it was only through dialoguing with that student that I learned that ASL and English are not the same language. And she just wasn't able to communicate the same way in written English as she could using ASL. And so it was a bit of an exploration process with that student to figure out, is there a better way than written assignments that you could convey your learning? She ended up doing a presentation instead, was able to communicate through ASL, and amazing, did a great job. Demonstrated course learning objectives fantastically. And so it was just such a moment of realizing how little we know about other people's experience, and how limiting very standard accommodations can be. What I knew about that student's accommodations was that she had extra time for writing her exams. And I was doubtful myself that having extra time was going to really address the barrier that was there in front of her. And anyway, just one of countless exchanges that I have had with students that have helped me to better understand the kinds of barriers that impede equitable participation. And so I guess just to share a few more of the tidbits I've learned from interacting with students: the importance of having high contrast on PowerPoint slides, the value in posting slides ahead of class, the necessity of accurate captioning on videos with audio and audio descriptions of visuals, the importance of scheduling regular breaks during lectures, the value in clearly communicating both instructions and expectations for assignments. These are all examples of the kind of access practices that I've really learned about through engagement with students. And part of what I'm learning then, or what we are learning, I think collectively, is that accessibility isn't something that I or that one does for someone else. It's something that we learn about and learn to practice together. And actually, I wanted to share that learning this language of access needs has actually enabled me to get in touch with and better understand my own access needs. And it's been a really positive experience and great surprise to figure out how breaking with some of these conventions in order to manage classrooms in ways that work well for my neurodivergent brain seems to have actually pretty great outcomes for my students as well. And so just through all of this experience, I'm learning the truth of the claim. And these are words that I often hear my colleague, Jeffry Preston, who I think originally was going to be here today and wasn't able to join. He always says, what's necessary for some is beneficial for us all. And to me, that really captures what is this UDL, or Universal Design for Learning approach. Just to circle back to ableism for a minute, something that I think people don't realize about ableism is that it affects all of us, because we all live in bodies and we're all shaped by these pressures to conform to societal and cultural norms. Those norms keep us working through illness. They keep us prioritizing productivity over rest and care. And for some of us, our bodies can withstand those pressures, and we really gain privilege then by being able to conform to these expectations. But for some of us, our bodies really can't. We operate with fewer resources of energy and time. We're not so privileged to have that choice to work more and more and harder to meet these ever increasing expectations. And what it means is that we have to make difficult choices sometimes, to sacrifice some of that privilege, that competitive edge, in order to take good care of ourselves and of others. And so this is how I see that ableism disadvantages people with non-normative bodies and minds. And as part of that conversation, I always like to include that as we're trying to find ways to push back against these systems that harm and exclude. I really believe that the place we need to look for guidance is to those who occupy diverse bodies and minds, because we have experiences that really beget a privileged knowledge about the value of community, about the inevitability of our interdependence, things like sustainability and creativity and care. So I would say that At the same time, we might say that ableism harms disabled people by creating systemic disadvantage. It really also harms us all by blocking out knowledge and wisdom about other ways of being and doing. So I'll wrap up just by saying that my hope for the future of our universities is to foster truly accessible campuses where disability is anticipated, where everybody knows about the best practices for accessible events, and where we can proudly share about our accessible pedagogies and classroom practices. Because imagine the possibilities if instead of stopping at acceptance and accommodation, we were actively advertising and recruiting disabled people in as students, staff, and faculty. So I'll stop there and I'll just say thank you very much for including me on the panel. I'm really excited to hear from our other panelists today.
Thanks so much, Erica. A lot of what you said, all of what you said resonated with me. And I think one of the takeaways is around sort of essential requirements and why do things have to be submitted in only one way. And I think that's problematic in grad school when we rely so heavily on the written word and there's other ways to express that knowledge. So I will now turn it over to Danielle next to talk a little bit about yoga.
Hi, am I on? Okay. That was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I think we're kind of on some of the same themes, but in sort of different areas of disability. I couldn't agree more with just about everything that you said. So thank you so much. I love getting the chance to learn from other people in similar or different areas in the field. It's amazing. So as Elizabeth sort of introduced me earlier, I work full-time currently as an accessibility counselor at Fanshawe College. I also work for Blueprint Counseling doing ADHD coaching. And again, I am neurodivergent AF in all kinds of different ways, and I think it is an absolute superpower in a lot of ways. And so I'm really excited to take the opportunity to kind of talk about ableism from a neurodivergent perspective and how that sort of translates in the academy and post-secondary education and in our systems. The reality of the situation is the world is not set up for neurodivergent people. It is set up for neurotypical people. And the one system that is probably set up more than any system for neurotypical people is the post-secondary education system, in my opinion. It comes with this sort of idea that we have to show up with a strong set of executive functioning skills. We need to be able to emotionally regulate. We need to be able to sit still. We need to be able to take in large amounts of verbal information. We need to be able to take notes in a way that is supposed to make sense for later. We need to meet due dates that may not make a lot of sense for us. And I think on top of that, there's also this sort of idea and this kind of perception of why people with ADHD or neurodivergent folks function the way that they do. And a lot of it is incredibly untrue. And I think what happens is that, my sister over here, Carly, but I know that honestly, it's true. And you want to know what happens when that happens is that we start to mask, right? So we mask everything, right? And so the idea that I'm going to go into waiting mode, I'm going to not fidget with my toys, cross my legs now almost obsessively. Used to be the leg kid, and they would point that out. You know, verbal processing is a thing, isn't it, Carly? It's a thing, okay? I don't talk to myself, I verbal process. The thoughts in my head come so quickly that I can't always sort them. So when I say them out loud to myself, right, whether or not I'm setting or preparing for something, that makes sense to me, but don't talk to yourself, Carly, because then you're weird. And so again, we spend a lot of time stopping doing the things that work for us, right? Because the perception is that we're not supposed to be doing those things. And masking is exhausting. And not only is it exhausting, but it starts to create perception in ourselves of a false sense of identity. We are starting to, we live that if we show our real selves, we won't be accepted, right? Or we won't fit in. And again, it is a very difficult time to kind of find yourself and still feel that you're good enough to be there. A lot of imposter syndrome. I think I believe it was probably a year in being an accessibility counselor before I actually realized that I wasn't, like, nobody was going to just tell me to leave. Like, I was like, eventually you're going to figure out that, and they're going to ask you to go. And then again, luckily, I work in a department that celebrates all of the awesome and weirdness that I am. And so as a result, I've been allowed to kind of use my gifts to kind of bring students together. One of my favorite things that I do is I co-facilitate a fantastic ADHD group that is really starting to thrive at Fanshawe. And I also help with the peer mentoring groups. And to me, that is one of the biggest ways that we can stop this and bring students together is to encourage, right, as many peer mentorship opportunities, as many student voices as possible, connect them, right? It's the students, it's you guys that are actually going to make the changes and make the differences. Let's go on, I have notes. So again, yes, so do them I start. So I think one of the stories I like to tell is I tell the day, so it's a quick one. And this is one that actually happened to me. And I think this is kind of telling about sort of this idea of who we are and why things happen for a reason, or why people think they happen. So again, neurodiversity, ADHD in particular, it's all about dopamine, right? It's all about, it's about dopamine, it's about the receptor and how we make dopamine. And so I think a lot of times, some of the ways that we present, either people think they're funny and they think they can make fun of us, or they think that we are either lazy, which is actually task avoidance due to a lack of like dopamine coming for them. Did you know neurotypical people make dopamine for everything? Like literally everything. If I took this over there when it was empty and threw it out and I was neurotypical, boom, dopamine. No, but what I have to do to make sure I clean my garbage is to remind myself it is a respectful way to do things. There's no reward system. So dopamine is our natural reward system. That happens when we complete tasks that are otherwise boring or not motivating to us. Emails, projects, and things that we may not have a lot of passion for. These are the types of things that I think our brains don't want to do. They just don't want to do them. And it's not because we are lazy or do not think they're important. It's just we are not rewarded with those things. So part of coaching is you learn to hack your brain. And again, if you could, anybody here who happens to be neurodivergent, you probably have hacked your brain. You actually know you're doing it. You're tricking it. Like you're absolutely tricking your own self to get things done. For coaching, I teach people how to gamify tasks, the use of body doubling, reward systems, all of these things that happen to help your brain make things a little bit faster or a little bit easier to do some of these things. So I know I was working and it was September, disability counseling, which is incredibly busy in September. And I was spinning, and I know I was spinning. I was twirling. Twirling is my favorite. I was eating over the sink. I was running from one place to the other place. I probably took 2 extra students in that I wasn't supposed to, but I had 5 minutes. I'm making this work. And so running around, I knew it didn't look good. Okay, I knew that. But I also was really confident in the work I'd done that morning. Like I knew I had managed to fit in a couple extra students that probably some other counselors wouldn't have been able to do. I feel like I did a good job. Sat down for my unpaid lunch. And these 2 ladies that worked at our front desk, who are lovely humans, they rolled in and they proceeded to do an impression of me. And it was, look at Danielle, this is what you look like today. And they're bumping into each other and they're spinning around and they're yelling squirrel and they're doing the things. And I waited and I'm thinking, and I looked at them and I said, you know what I find really interesting? Why is my disability one of the last ones where it is still socially acceptable to make fun of the symptom? Why is that a thing, right? If I had a learning disability, nobody would have come in and been like, oh, Danielle, did you see how slow she was reading that today? Like if I had been using a wheelchair, nobody would have said, look at Danielle, she couldn't get through the door today. But for some reason, right, when we're talking about neurodivergence and some of the things that our brains do and how they respond, simply because these are our brains, that's hilarious. And so again, leading to masking, leading to these things that are very exhausting and really have a strong effect on our confidence. Accommodation process, this is where I really agree with my previous person, Heather, is that accommodations are funny. I'm a substitute counselor. Accommodations are my jam. Accommodations are not really, again, set up for people who are neurodivergent. I have this beautiful checklist. Do you want to know what the 2 are that are listed for ADHD? They're repetition, clarification, and preferential feeding. Okay, so that's what they are. Now, obviously, there are other pieces here that we draw from for other accommodations, but it shows you in this one section, how little really there is that is very specific to us. And I think, again, a lot of that is that we don't ask for what we actually need. And another one of my stories is that I interviewed twice for my jobs. First time I was not successful for the full-time position. And I interviewed terribly. It's an awful day. So the next time I did this, my boss, who was actually quite lovely, came in and asked me, you know, is there any accommodations? And I said, actually, yes, I've been giving it some thought. And there were two things that I would like. And she said, extra time for the case study. And I was like, didn't I write those case studies? I'm like, no, I don't need extra time for a case study. I go, I need a clock. I said, an analog clock preferably. And I said, and a pen and a paper. And she went, a clock? A clock? What do you need a clock for? She kept saying clock. And I said, because in these types of interviews, every single question is 3 parts. Okay, they're all 3 parts, right? So name a thing, what were the challenges, how did you resolve it? 3 parts. Okay, great. So by the time, okay, everybody working memory and neurodivergency, you asked me the first one, I might answer it, now I've forgotten the other 2. I might start with the middle one, I don't remember. And I might get so passionate on the first part of your 3-part question, I just spent 7 minutes on it. So if I can have a clock and this, all I need to do is jot literally 2 words at each of your 3-part questions, watch my clock, count 45 seconds or a minute to the time that I'm done, and then I've got this. But again, asking for these 2 things, which were actually quite, I could have brought my own little clock. Like, it's not like I could have done that. But it's just, again, because what we ask for isn't what everybody else needs, it's almost like it is a silly request or not actually an accommodation request. That's crucial to my success in order to move on. And I think those things are really important piece here. Couple more things. Look at that. I'm almost done. Couple more things. Am I good for time? Because I don't have a clock. Okay. So I really did. I meant to last night. And so again, a couple other things important, I think, in terms of how to reduce some of this sort of ableism in this particular life. Again, we're thinking about these accommodations and what are actual accommodations. And starting to talk about it, it is actually time to get noisy for students who are neurodivergent and to start to not mask, right? Not to hide and pretend we fit into these systems. So for me, I know one of the accommodations that I talk to professors a lot about is check-in due dates, right? So not due dates where the thing has to be handed in, but there's opportunity for students to break down these assignments into certain checkpoints and to check in after each one of these times. One of my favorite stories is when a professor said to me, one of your students has requested an extension prior to the due date, okay, and I'm not comfortable giving it because I've had the due date posted since the beginning of the term. I actually laughed, yeah, and I have a bar I'm trying not to do it today, but I actually laughed and I was like, how does that stop me from starting it the night before? It doesn't matter when you post the due date, I'm still gonna start it. Does everybody know what an automatic adrenaline response is? So there's, yeah, so this is actually why students who are neurodivergent, ADHD in particular, tend to start everything in the 11th hour. What happens is when we start to panic, our brain floods with adrenaline, and adrenaline actually stimulates the same parts of our brain that our ADHD medication does, which then all of a sudden allows us to focus, right, on everything. And then it's all I'm doing for the next 24 hours. I'm not going to sleep, I'm not going to eat, and I'm not going to pee. I'm getting this done. And I did a whole degree like that. My whole degree at Western, my first one, I was chocolate covered coffee beans and starting everything the night before. And so it's doable, but the issue is that it's unsustainable, right? And so eventually, again, it's exhausting, right? We need to learn how to take care of ourselves and do things. And so this idea of chunking, which sounds so simple, right? But again, when we look at, for us, when we see something and it's overwhelming, it's too big. So when I teach people to chunk, I'm always like, take down smaller, take down smaller, take down smaller. And again, when all of a sudden that one piece of it seems manageable, that's where you start, right? And so I think when professors often design their assignments, especially in, you know, the university setting where things are often, you know, interpretation or a little, maybe perhaps a little bit more philosophical or not as straight up sort of assignments, maybe the same as you may find at Fanshawe, it can be really overwhelming for us. It's like, I don't know. So again, this idea of breaking things down, allowing students to check in, right? And to come in and have these sort of checkpoint due dates, more access to things like coaching and organizational skills. The BSWD, which is bursary, disabilities, I'm sure a lot of people here know what that is a big part of what I do as an accessibility counselor and accessing that. I find it really interesting that the BSWD will cover ADHD coaching. They're both secondary students, as long as they're OSAP eligible, and all the other will go around it. But when you go into the workplace, even if you have discretionary benefits, there is no coverage for ADHD coaching. I know this because I'm an ADHD coach who's not a registered social worker. So as a result of that, right, I will be covered by any benefit. To me, this is it's discriminatory. That I have a diagnosed disability where the research will clearly prove, right, that good coaching, and again, that shows in accordance with medication, if that's what people choose, is optimum treatment. You can read that anywhere, like absolutely anybody will tell you that. But I can go and get talk therapy, which often for a neurodiverse brain doesn't have the same effects. I'm not in any way dissing talk therapy. It is some of my best friends, they're psychotherapists and social workers, and it is a valuable, valuable service. But for my particular brain, it doesn't work, right? I want people to tell me solutions and things to do. It is just a different way my brain works. And so as a result of that, if people are diagnosed late, or if they're not OSAP eligible, or they are in the workplace, they could have the best benefits ever and still not be able to access that service. And so I do celebrate the fact that the BSWD recognizes that. I'm not always happy with it, I'm not gonna lie. But this is one thing that I'm proud, and they even separated it. So it used to be that you could access up to $1,000 a term in counseling or ADHD. Now you can do both. So if you had a need for both, you can do $1,000 of each one. So that is new. One of the things they've done lately that I actually enjoy. So let me see. I think sort of kind of to sum up, I guess the last thing I would also say in terms of this sort of reducing ableism is also recognize ADHD really travels by itself. Okay, so comorbidities and secondary diagnoses are not the exception, they're the norm, right? So it is very rare that you will meet somebody. And that's for all kinds of reasons. One of them being, if people call you crazy, lazy, and stupid for most of your elementary and secondary school, you're eventually going to feel anxious and depressed. However, those are not the only two comorbidities you're going to find. But you can't like accommodate one without the other one, right? So again, recognizing that there are maybe more levels, right, to a student that is neurodivergent than just those pieces. It's not just about organization and time management, and there's so much more around that. Another little fact is that students, when they're coming and they are in particular ADHD in the elementary and secondary school system, you do not receive accommodation just for having ADHD unless your parent is willing to declare you a behavior problem. I think it's section 212 or something in the Education Act. I know, because I fought very, very hard for my daughter to be accommodated without that label on her thing. So students will come into the post-secondary system. They don't even know they can get accommodation, right? They do not know they can get accommodations, let alone that there is actually, services and, stuff happening. They've never actually had them. And so again, so much math. Oh yeah, I'm wrapping it up. Okay, I'm done. So here's definitely what I'm going to say. Final statement is that the best advice I can give is that it is time to take off the masks, right? Take off the masks and learn how to ask for what we need, right? Without shame, right? Without any of those pieces that's around that. So thank you very much for listening to my ADHD rant. My favorite thing we talked about.
Great, thank you, Danielle. I really enjoyed the aspect of being an imposter. As someone who has both visible and invisible disabilities, I find that my visible disabilities are treated more seriously than the invisible ones. So having to deal with that imposter syndrome, especially in grad school, is really prevalent for me. So with that being said, let's turn it over to Heather.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm a white woman with green glasses and purple hair, for those that can't see me. Thank you so much to Erica and Danielle for their talks, because it really situates things for me. I am the lovely ADHD diagnosed later, went through the childhood of, considered the self-talk of laziness and last minute Nelly, and it's been an interesting mind shift. So accessibility has always been something I've been interested in, but it was really when I started teaching in the university that things kind of opened up my eyes a little bit further on this. I had a student who was legally blind, and had trouble with the learning management system, you know, the OWL equivalent or Blackboard, Canva type of thing. And I took it up and said, hey, this isn't working for my student. I'm like, oh, no, we've tested it. It's compliant with legislation. And this was my introduction to technically accessible versus actual accessibility. And it kind of grew my interest from there. If I can kind of start at the big level of the university and then kind of bring it down to my classroom, it's just the way I've been thinking about things this way. There have been some interesting things around the university. Carly mentioned early on about the strong push to shift back to in-person classes across Canada, and Western was no outlier in that. And it was interesting because we found out that we could do all this cool stuff from distance and technology and have these hybrid moments. And then it's like, no, we have to be back in the classroom. We have to be back in the classroom. And pretty much unless you had, as a professor, as an instructor, had accommodations lined up and had documentation in place, you were back face-to-face in classes. And then students didn't really have an option as well. So that was, I think, a misstep as far as university and college level education, that quick shift back. On the other side of things, where I'm seeing good things happen within the university, I'm seeing more consultation ahead of time for things like Weldon Library at Western is in the middle or near the end of a huge revamp. And they had an accessibility consultation group as part of that, because there were known issues with the original structure of the building, and they were looking to figure out how to make this a more accessible space. So that's good. But then we have things like 3 weeks before the summer term starts, I teach during the summer, we found out we couldn't use any of our classrooms and that we would have to be using classrooms in other buildings across the campus. And I was out of town. I was like, okay, I guess that's fine. And I show up my first day of class and my classroom is inaccessible. So I'm teaching an accessibility class in a building and in a room that isn't accessible. Like the tables are bolted to the floor, sort of inaccessible, and heavy doors to get through, and no accessible washroom on that floor sort of scenario. And when I raised concerns, I said, this is a problem. And somebody's like, oh, I didn't know you had anybody with mobility issues in your class. And I was like, that shouldn't matter. We shouldn't be thinking about it, oh, it's fine as long as no one says anything. And I think that's where the culture needs to shift in academia. There's that, well, if somebody needs something, they will speak up, they will advocate for themselves. And disabled people are tired of advocating for themselves. They're tired of asking, to being the one that is a problem, right? To address a problem or to point out a problem, you become the problem. And Sarah Ahmed's great wisdom as far as talking about problem development. So a lot of times folks don't. So we need to be thinking more ahead of time and anticipating those needs. My student who uses a wheelchair shouldn't have to say, hi, I use a wheelchair. I need to make sure I can access all the classrooms. That should just be a given at this point. It's 2023. Within my own class and thinking around ableism, I try to consider UDL and accessibility holistically throughout my courses. And by that, I mean, I try to anticipate points of concerns and remove what barriers that I can. And so I do this for all of my students, not just those who are registered with accessible education. Everyone in my class has access to the same supports. So I try to anticipate needs so that students, A, they know what's available to them, right? It's not a hidden list somewhere, and that everybody has access to them. And I try to make sure they don't have to advocate for themselves, that these things are built in and you know, you can use them whenever you need. So I start with something like course policies. Everyone can ask for some flexibility with their due dates if they need extra time. They don't have to have a disability to use this flexibility. Some folks use it because they have a lot of due dates that are close together. You need some flexibility? Okay. There are no late penalties. You need an extension? Okay. You're going to be late? Okay. You need to record the lectures? Okay. That's fine. If I can do it, I will make it happen. You have a family emergency. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. Take care of that stuff first, what you need to take care of, and then come back and we'll figure out a new due date. It's fine. My course policies start with the idea, and this is a quote from my syllabus, if you need a reasonable or even unreasonable accommodation, please let me know and I'll try to make it happen. This goes triply for folks with non-visible disabilities or who pass or mask or compensate. No need to do that here. I did not come up with these lovely words. This is from one of my lovely Twitter friends. And I was like, I'm going to borrow this, okay? And she was fine with that. But beyond that, I try to set the tone by telling my students, A, that I trust you, and B, that I believe you. I trust that you're doing your best. I want you to trust that I'm doing my best. When you tell me that you are hoping for some flexibility, I believe you. It's fine. You are a person with a whole life of family and your own issues and challenges and things going on in your life. And grad school is not, it's not always the top consideration at this point in time. So yeah, I believe you, I trust you, and we can go from there. Beyond that policy, I do things like give students credit for participation. So they get participation points, but they just get them. Everybody gets them. There's no so-and-so, you know, Erica spoke up 17 times over the term, so she gets a really high score. But Danielle didn't really speak at all, so she's going to get a lower score. Like I'm not going to do any of that. I value the time that my students spend with me. I value what they contribute to the course, whether it's through text or whether it's through speaking. And I reassure my students, they're never going to get called out. My poor introverts who will just wilt if they think they have to speak in class. I totally understand that. You don't have to speak. I can see you looking up. I know that you're paying attention. I know that you're engaged with the class. You don't have to participate in a way that's going to make you wildly uncomfortable. And they don't have to go through the accommodations processes to get this. For some folks, the work required to get accommodation makes it not worth the struggle to get it. If it inflames some arthritis or some chronic fatigue or fibro issues that you're having with your own body and the work to get accommodation, you may just struggle through, right? Let alone the fact that right now in London, there's about, I think, a 1-year wait list for a psychiatric referral. Like to even get accommodation can be a huge process. So I don't expect folks to have gone through this process for me to be flexible with their needs, because I trust them and I believe them in what they need to be successful in my courses. And I'm trying to, in my role as grad chair of the Library of Information Science program, I'm trying to gently nudge my fellow faculty members to be like, you know, do we need to be restrictive on this? You know, is there a way to open up? What are the risks of opening up? Like, I'm pretty willy-nilly about a lot of things, and that makes some people uncomfortable, right? Flexibility due dates, okay, it doesn't bother me. You know, something needs to change, okay, like I can kind of roll with whatever. And I think for some instructors, there's a control challenge, and it's a concern about what happens when we relinquish control. And so I've been doing this experiment with myself as far as the due dates and the attendance, and just telling students I trust you and I believe you, and it's working out really well. It time shifts some things, but for the most part, it creates a really interesting atmosphere for discussion, for assignments. I get to read really good papers because my students get the time and space they need to be able to create something that works for them and isn't competing with 6 other deadlines in their space. I'm trying to think what else I have here. I don't know, maybe I'm just gonna stop there because I want to hear what other folks have to say and things. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was really incredible. I resonated a lot with what you said, both as a student and as a teaching assistant, and trust. Our academic world is not built on trust and empathy. We are constantly trying to see if students are cheating. Oh my God, did I cheat by asking Michaela the answer to that question? Or Did I cheat because Carly looked over my paper to make sure that the formatting isn't in 12 different fonts? Yep, I did, I guess, because that's the culture we built. And I love what you're saying. And flexible deadlines. I remember in one of my early years of grad school, somebody said to me, well, when you're a professor or out in the working world, you have to meet deadlines, so I can't move them around. And I said to her, but I will self-select into a career where I have some flexibility with deadlines. So thank you so much. I want to just open the question up to all of our panelists, and we touched on it a little bit, but I would love to hear a little bit more about how you bring UDL and accessibility into your classroom or the classroom of professors, and just to make sure that we allow for sort of voice breaks. I'll flip the order a bit, and Danielle, can I get you to go first?
So I guess for me, it'd be more about how do I advise that? So in my role as an accessibility counselor, I always tell them to work me out of a job. I say it all the time. I'm just like, there are so many things you guys could do where you wouldn't have to do it. Yeah. And so again, one of the things for me is, again, posting of notes. I know I got to put a pushback on notes. If we post the notes, the children, they won't come. I'm like, be engaging. I mean, when I talk, I posted everything. I had almost perfect attendance every single time. Pretty sure it's because I'm funny. So at the end of the day, it's one of those things where, why do we hang on to this stuff, right? So again, it's exactly what Heather was just talking about. Why do we need, why do we need to have all these arbitrary rules? The systems are awful, and it's true. It's like the wait lists for diagnosis. We have interim accommodations. That's one thing that I do, and that my department does. We'll take you come in, we'll take you on good faith. I'll just extend it until you can. But again, that's tied to funding. That'll help you with accommodations. That won't get you the support that you need funded through the VSWD. So all these different systems. But I think for professors, it's that idea of talking to students, ask them what they need, and take them on trust for the 1% of all humans, not or whatever percentage, small percentage of all humans, not just people with disabilities. There will always be somebody who takes advantage of the system. But why don't we focus on the other 90% of humans that just need to have particular things in order to thrive?
Thanks so much. And I think, just to kind of pick up on accommodations, we see it as this big, scary word, but we accommodate people every day. Religious observances, family responsibilities, needing to leave early, flex work, even lights. I don't need lights, but hey, you guys do, so there's an accommodation. Erica, I'll pop over to you.
Sure. Yeah. A few. I really love that the idea of just like communication. Like, I can come in with my ideas. I'm always trying to learn. Whether it's reading or watching or, just kind of building my own bank based on experience. But one thing I've been trying to do with students is to open the dialogue at the start of the year to talk about what is access, what are access needs. Because it's possible some of us have never even thought about what kind of access needs we might have. Sharing about my own access needs, I really like that. I think it was Heather said something about sort of this like mutuality that's like, I'm here for what you need. Or I know that you're doing your best. And trust that I'm also doing my best. But we kind of need to communicate with each other in order to do our best. Some of the other like more specific practices are, actually, this came out of working with interpreters in the classroom, was learning to speak slower. I was so grateful for I'm sure my students were too, for the interpreters constantly saying, can you slow down, please? It was also, the practice of posting notes ahead also came out of working with interpreters, because they would request to have my materials ahead of time. And ultimately, I think some people might say, well, that's impossible. I can't have my materials ready, but you learn to. And I think for me, ultimately, it ended up supporting me. I felt calmer when I wasn't finishing my notes, shortly before lecture. And so sometimes, there's like unexpected great outcomes from access practices. Something else I've been working on is trying to use more accessible texts. So trying to use, really avoiding, I only teach undergraduate students, and I just find a lot of academic writing is not accessible. And so with that, even trying to take on a little bit less in the classroom, so that instead of having like a go 3-hour lecture, chunking, really, like it's integrating these like accommodation sort of principles, offering a little bit less material so that we have more time to talk about it and, you know, get different perspectives on it and just really be able to digest things together. And I guess the last one I would mention is sort of an open access culture within the classroom. So I've just started playing around with this idea of setting up a Google Drive and asking if people would like to share their notes. You know, I think there's some people might not know other people in the class, and if they have to miss a day, I you know, my dream scenario is that I will have my notes in full prepared to post. I'm committed to posting my PowerPoint, but sometimes I go off on a different direction than planned. And anyway, I've just invited students, if you're open to sharing your notes, maybe someone else will be open to sharing their notes. And, you know, maybe what if even instead of not having to ask each other, we just, are you comfortable just posting them? Can we just share? Is that like a cultural norm that we could set for ourselves? And I tried that for the first time this past term and got really positive feedback from students. So that was really cool to see.
Great, thank you, Erica. I find the accessible readings really interesting. I find like a lot in my program, professors are like, here's this text that is scanned from 99 and has my personal notes on it. Those are really important. And I'm like, Kurzweil does not pick that up. Thank you. Heather, I'd love to hear what you had to say.
Hi again. Building off of what Erica said, the ADHD in me just means that getting my slides done before class is problematic, or they'll be done. And then the morning of class, I'll be like, oh my God, we could do this. Or, you know, a Twitter story will pop up and I'll just be like, ooh, we have to add this in. This is so relevant. It's so I'm trying to get, I am this term, I have gotten slides posted before class every time. And one time I got them posted the night before class. And that is like a personal record, a personal best for me so far. But I absolutely agree with Erica, the importance of that, particularly for students that it's very helpful for them to be able to follow along with the slides or make notes on the slides as they go through. Posting notes is something that, it just makes me nervous sweat. The idea of posting my notes, because my notes are kind of like what's going on inside my head. And sometimes they're not coherent and they're not fully fleshed out and they're not fully formed. They're kind of random ideas or random quotes that I'm kind of riffing off of. But I have done this a few times this term where I was like, hey, we can't, last week, we could not have class because I could not breathe because of the smoke from the wildfires in the air. I also have asthma really bad. So I'm like a canary in a coal mine. I was like, I can't lecture. I said, but I told the class, I said, you know, here are my notes, but they, with a caveat being they're partial, they're stream of consciousness, they're random, and you're not allowed to judge me on the quality of my notes. And so, or at least within my hearing. And then other than that, we were fine. So I think adding in the idea of notes is a really good idea. And it's something that I'm trying to work towards. And what was said earlier about that 1%, I would happily be a sucker for that 1% who's like whatever getting away with something, then provide any restrictions for anyone that might need it. Like, that's fine. I want to be this type of person and this type of instructor. And that's a conscious choice. Be like, it doesn't bother me. That's no skin off my nose for that to happen. In thinking about like the class structure and things, I think the one thing that I always try to take to heart is that it's never done. We can never get to the point where we're saying, oh, this is accessible, right? There's always something more to think about, something different to consider, some difference that we might bring in that might be helpful that we just haven't thought of or seen yet. Things like the font in the slides that we use in our PowerPoints, and are those fonts accessible? As far as, you know, the sans serif versus serif fonts, some fonts are easier to read for people with dyslexia than others. even the presentation of the slides and how much text there is versus imagery. Color contrast was mentioned earlier. So taking those sorts of things into consideration is important. Remembering to hit the closed caption button so that on videos, that automatically comes up. Like sometimes I get excited and I forget to push the button and then somebody's like, Heather, this is not accessible. Like, oh, shoot. All right, let's fix that. So I'm always looking and learning and trying to do it a little bit better than I did last time. And I think that that is always the way going forward. Like we don't get a stamp of approval at some point and say, oh, you're accessible and you don't have to worry about that anymore. Because accessibility is a varying thing depending on who's in the classroom. And it's something that we're always developing and working on. And yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Heather. I really appreciate your notes. I am one of Heather's students, so I really appreciate everything she's been doing. I would love to hear about how we're wrapping it up. Okay, we're wrapping it up. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, Elizabeth, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just very briefly, before we wrap up, I just want to thank our panelists, Dr. Erica Katzman, Dr. Heather Hill, and Danielle Cheyne for their wisdom and getting us to think about post-secondary sites as communities of care and collective care, and access is everybody's responsibility, as opposed to the sort of hyper-capitalist way that we tend to view post-secondary and very individualistic nature of accommodation. So really getting us to sort of think how we download responsibility to students with disabilities who are already doing so much equity work and taking on that equity tax and emotional labor. So thank you to our panelists. Please join me in giving them a big round of applause.
Woo! Yeah. And that's it. So I will see everyone back here at 2:50. I do believe they left some snacks out in the room, along with like pop, juices, coffee. Sandwiches are in fridge jail, as I like to call it, so that we can make you better. Coffee, I did say coffee. So yeah, I'll see everyone back here at 2:50. And Alan, you're good to oh, hi, Anne. Answer. Sorry, Alan, we can pause for.
Hi, everyone. So I didn't get a chance to introduce myself earlier. My name is Michaela Rai. I'm at MLIS Masters of Library and Information Science at Western Main Campus. And I have 3 disabilities. I call myself a triple threat. And yes, and I'm very interested, and I'm a part of SOGS, Accessibility Commission, and that's why I'm here.
Hello.
Turned it off. I turned it off.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Forrest. I'm the SOGS Accessibility Commissioner, and I am thrilled to be here. I have multiple disabilities, but I won't run through the list. Just to get things going, I'm just going to start off with our first student panelist, Jonathan.
Thank you. So, hello. My name is Jonathan. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I personally really appreciate it, both virtually and in person. I'm just going to dive right in. So someone in the EDI office once said that I have an agenda. To this, I say, I agree. I want to see Western University become and get developed into the accessible institution that I know that it can be. So just a bit of numbers and statistics. So in terms of caseload is the number of disabled students per advisor that exists in a specific institution. In 2019, an organization that's called the Inter-University Disability Issues Association has surveyed a number of Ontario universities and found that most universities have a caseload of less than 400. One exception to this is, not surprisingly, Western University. The CAS review that happened about 2 years ago found that 250 to 300 is a good range, and the United States have 133, which is, of course, much lower than 250. But Western University has between 5,000 to 6,000 students registered with accessible education, and only 8 disability advisors. That means that we are sitting at between 625 to 750 in terms of caseload, which is, even if we're being very optimistic, it's still over double. Moving on from that, the CUSC survey of the first year students that happened in 2022 found that 31% of student respondents self-identify as having a disability. But the equity census that happened in Western University only found 9.1%. That says a lot. It also raises a lot of questions. The same report, the external review, it's called the CAS external review, found that a number of different things, but something that I personally found very interesting is a specific quote that goes, the students who took part in the external review indicated a general mistrust in the intentions of the institution being Western. Students indicated that they felt the processes are fragmented and fractured, and that they did not believe anything that would come from the review process. So that brings me to the next point, which is the challenges that are being faced by Western University. So disabled students, like I just said, lost trust. There's no transparency, or not enough of the transparency that's needed, which of course makes trust even harder to get. There's also a feeling of suspicion that comes out of it towards the decision-making process. There is a feeling of selective listening. A lot of people higher up in Western only listen when it's very convenient, when it fits the narrative. I'm personally a member of the SAAC. That's one of the committees that came out of the review. It's the Student Accessibility Advisory Committee. I can say that from experience that we were muzzled and became a bit of a meaningless committee as time progressed, and that's just not it. There's also a sense that the disabilities and accessibility was kind of left behind by the EDI office over the last 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic. And yeah, in the same train of thought, there's a feeling that 2 years after the review has started, it's just a lack of tangible improvements. On kind of continuing from the same point of view, tokenism and paternalism, instead of meaningful and real actions that actually we will actually see any kind of results from as students with disabilities. And while the burden itself it shouldn't be on us as students with disabilities, we really would like to be an active and involved voice in this process, and it's a real shame that we are not as involved as we can and would like to be. So solutions. This is a direct quote from the same review. By putting students with disabilities at the center of all decision-making processes and listening to the feedback, there is an opportunity to establish more trust and confidence in the service. That's very obvious, I think. There's a very strong need for a good dispute resolution system within the Accessible Education Office. Currently, the existing system is, to say the least, not wonderful. Looking at outside of the university, the Ontario Human Rights Commission has a fantastic policy, very detailed, when it comes to education. Western should really adopt it, or at least try to take some of the good points out of it. There is need for encouraging for reward, accountability, and transparency from faculty and staff, and participation from students. Continuance and iterative improvement over time. Accessibility is not just one moment. provide information packets to students with disabilities. So we will know better, we will understand better both rights and responsibilities because those go hand in hand. And we also need more transparency when it comes to what we can actually get and what we actually need to ask for. We also need to have a lot more understanding that the instructors should not have a say in what students get. There are a number of accommodations that some of them I actually received myself that actually say only if approved by the instructor. No offense to any instructor, just not their job. Let them do their job, not somebody else's job. So it's just not the right kind of way of approaching responsibilities. Another few points is that just to remember the tenets of duty to accommodate. It's respect the dignity, individualization, which I probably could not pronounce to save my life, integration and full participation. These are very simple things. The policy that I mentioned before actually lists them very clearly in terms of what they each involve. Train on the same subject, and of course on undue hardship, what means that yes, what means no, what's okay, what's not okay. Students shouldn't need to provide this information to people on a daily basis, which I also experienced. Investments, currently Western University, I think it was about a year ago, invested a one-time sum of $1 million towards the idea of accessibility. But accessibility is not a one-time investment. It's just, oh, now you're accessible and you're good, right? It takes time and it's over time. And of course, above all else, there is the need to listen. We give the feedback, but there's no listening. Had there been listening, it would have been easier, and taking action to show that the listening actually happens. That will, of course, be very important. The benefits of doing that, there are actually a lot of them. This is just a really short count, right? Less legal problems, right? Because when there is no dispute system, just goes to the tribunal. That costs money, a lot of money. Less students dropping out, means better statistics, better PR, better optics, means also that students want to stay and actually go towards the higher levels of education, towards master's, towards PhD programs, and that means it's easier to actually get that recruitment going. And as a nice bonus, of course, it improves reputation. Last and not least, it's the law. It's not a choice. To sum things up a bit, there were too many broken promises and empty statements that the result from that is that disabled students just having little to no trust in the system. And the individuals in authority also there's a lack of trust in them too. Rebuilding this trust, it means that it will take true engagement, both from the community of disabled students and the community at large. And it means that there shouldn't be a claim of, we know better than you, from either side, by the way, but currently the paternalism kind of comes very strongly from Western itself. It means engaging with us. It means taking meaningful action that reflects the words and statements that we hear all the time, but we just don't see the actions reflected from those. And it will take an honest and hard work, but it is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. I loved how you addressed how inaccessible and how ableist post-secondary is and how we are constantly having to fight, and that is an exhausting fight that we shouldn't have to. And that is very unfortunate. I'm going to toss it over to Naomi now.
Okay, hello. My name is Naomi. I'm doing a professional master's of occupational therapy at Western. I'm in my second year currently. I'm going to try and not talk too fast. So a little bit about my background. I have been wearing an accessibility advocacy hat for about 10 years. I presented at my first accessibility conference in 2011. That may be a little bit longer than 10 years now. I'm getting old. But I also spent some time working for the Accessibility Fund, Parents with Disabilities Division of the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility. I was working for the Public Education Strategic Initiatives branch of the AODA before I started graduate school. So we wear a number of different hats in this space. One of the things that I'm really excited about is solution-focused conversation around accessibility and advancing accessibility in positive and proactive ways, because I'm a firm believer that accessible design is really just good design, and that accessibility is better for everybody, right? The accessible way brings forward a lot of solutions that we're really just the canary in the coal mine, right? And if we are accommodated, then we're definitely in a spot where that rising tide can lift all of the boats, including the normie students. So yeah, my perspective is very solution focused. I believe that people who get seasick shouldn't rock boats, and my advocacy appetite is also a valid one. But I've started a few solution focused strategic initiatives within the Masters of Occupational Therapy at Western, advocated for the creation of an accessibility rep on our student council to couple with the EDI reps so that accessibility isn't put on the back burner in consideration of human rights. And really to talk about the fact that with the new standards coming out under the AODA, healthcare is going to need to be accessible, right? And if we are going to graduate competent clinicians in dentistry or nursing or occupational therapy, physio, anything in that space, they will need to be competent to deliver accessible healthcare upon graduation, right? And one way to really ensure that that happens would be to have the professors within these programs modeling accessible delivery of care and accessibility best practices in their classrooms, so that the students have a 2-year primer on the best ways to bring that forward. So I think that we have a responsibility to uphold the rights of students with disabilities, but also the rights of the normie students with the normie students as well, right? Because accessibility in this case is better for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. You had a lot in there, and the one thing I really love that you would say is about the importance of accessibility, not only for people with disabilities, but also that that we model accessibility and accessible delivery of education or services to those that were preparing to go out into the world to work in healthcare or any service providing field, because that changes the attitudes going forward. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to is online. Then I hope you're ready.
Hi. Can you see me, hear me? Am I in? Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Finn. I'm a non-binary, disabled, and chronically ill student going into my 3rd year of disability studies, formerly at King's UWO. So I've had a lot of experience with ableism at King's, but I wanted to talk today about an experience I had with the student health clinic, with a quick content warning for discussion of medical ableism and saneism. So when I first started my degree, I was diagnosed and given the label ADHD and prescribed stimulants by a doctor at the student clinic. They told me I would likely need the medication to participate, and it was true. In such an inaccessible learning environment, medication is one of the only effective accommodations available to me, and I do rely on it. So after 2 years on my medication, I went back to a different doctor at Student Health, but this time I was denied my prescription. This new doctor described my medication as dangerous and told me I would need to sign a stimulant consent form, which would waive my right to privacy, right to refuse treatment, and expose me to institutionalization and police intervention if he determined I was not taking my medication as intended. He had no evidence that I wasn't taking my medication properly, but nonetheless, he refused to renew my prescription. When I questioned him, he described a so-called drug epidemic at the university. He told me that at this point I could buy my meds from the library and that it didn't matter what I thought of the policy. It was best practices. I don't have enough time to discuss why it is so objectionable to describe any drug use as an epidemic, nor why policies like these are the workings of colonial sanist ideologies that search for the root of systemic problems within marginalized people. We have known for some time that this kind of pathologizing and paternalistic policy is deeply damaging, whether the medical field claims it is best practices or not. But I'm struck by something else he said to me. He described himself as the one who has to clean up this mess. I want to focus in on this mess because I think whether he meant to or not, he was describing people, a policy that has to clean up, or maybe more accurately, to clean out people. Perhaps to the university administration, who may have no experience with drug use or disability, this policy seems appropriately strict, proactive, or effective. But from my perspective as a disabled person and psychiatric survivor, whether a student is using stimulants as intended or not, it is absurd to suggest that increased surveillance and institutional or police intervention would in any way keep that student safe or help them thrive at university. Instead, policies such as these prove to us that UWO is more willing to criminalize, institutionalize, and dispose of disabled or deviant students than they are to actually allow us to be in this space. After this interaction, I felt so disposable. I felt all the grief my body had stored while I had tried to make it work at school. During my whole time at King's, I had been working hard to obtain my accommodations, advocating for policy change, constantly negotiating with administration who promised me my suggestions were important and being administered. And yet I leave now with no proof of my labor, no proof of their commitment. In fact, I leave with proof that things are getting worse. It is clear to me that UWO is not interested in examining the environment they themselves have designed, a system deeply harmful from the beginning, now broken to the point of collapse, where disabled students have to sacrifice immensely just to be included, where our education has never felt so empty, and yet the expectations so high, an environment so untenable. I really question whether students can hold off the burnout fast enough to get their degree. It is easy for UWO to hide their inaction by drawing students in and using our labor as proof of their commitment to change. It's easy for them to do this without producing anything because we as students have so little power. We can put up with it or we can leave. And we do leave. And all of that knowledge and beauty that could have been is co-opted into pain and hopelessness. Part of our prompt for this presentation was to reflect on solutions, but lately I find myself resistant to this, in part because I feel that actionable solutions have already been crafted through disability and other critical studies. Many before us have already done this work and those solutions are ready to be implemented. I encourage UWO to implement these solutions, and I ask them further, why have you not already done this? Why instead do they choose time and time again to ask students to take on the brunt of this labor? To other disabled students, I want to offer, keep track of what you are asked to sacrifice and ask yourself, if it is not you being protected, what do they protect? Pay attention to whether you are allowed to grieve, to rest, or to consent to what the school demands from you. I can't come up with a solution that will counteract the university's refusal to be held accountable or to stop doing harm. Instead, I hope that when asked to sacrifice just to be in these spaces, we keep something for ourselves. When we are expected to break in order to participate, I hope we break down something in return. And I hope that we can take everything we can back to our own community to imagine our own futures outside of these systems that do not know how to want us. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ben. It's unfortunate that like I can relate to your experience at health services. That's too bad. We'll toss it over to Nathan now.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nathan Moore. My pronouns are he, him. I finished a PhD in philosophy of physics at Western in 2019. And I want to say a few things about the barriers I faced as an autistic PhD student and the sorts of solutions that I think are necessary to address them. I also want to emphasize that while academia can have its own unique barriers, barriers that are not unique to the academic context are still present and can be extremely devastating on their own. The first, and I guess essentially only barrier I want to discuss is ostracism, focusing on its impacts rather than how or why it occurs. So psychologically, the ostracism I experienced at Western exacerbated the loneliness, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and CPTSD that I was already dealing with from my experiences of ostracism outside of academia, where I regularly go for weeks, even months sometimes, without meaningful interactions with anyone. Scholastically, I lost opportunities to participate in reading groups, refine ideas for papers or conference presentations, attend and present at conferences, network, take advantage of training, as well as the loss of employment opportunities that comes from the impact of these other lost opportunities on my CV and social connections. Ostracism is a barrier that cannot be addressed via accommodations, and that often results from unconscious bias that can't be addressed merely by training. Add to this that I only discovered I was autistic during my PhD and initially had no idea what sorts of accommodations or accessibility features I might need. Focusing on reactive accommodations rather than proactive accessibility can often have little or even no benefit for many neurodivergent students. Lack of fulfillment in my personal life, lack of opportunities for the sorts of employment that I would find sufficiently fulfilling, and significant difficulty finding employment at all throughout my life have resulted in me deciding to end my life via NEADS. If the planned March expansion had gone ahead, that would have been happening within the next few months. And the lack of accessibility can ruin or end lives. One last thing before I move on to solutions. Academia has always played a significant role in the creation, maintenance, and the amplification of ableism. And this is something we should be very much keep in mind when universities are unwilling to entertain so-called radical solutions to ableism. Philosophy in particular has played a significant negative role in disabled people's lives. For example, with bioethicists approving harmful research and supporting policies such as NEADS, which despite my plan to use it, I recognize as an awful eugenics-based project that I shouldn't have the option to be using. To give a recent and particularly horrible example, two bioethicists at the University of Toronto wrote a paper that was published online in the Journal of Medical Ethics on April 26th, arguing that NEADS should be available specifically for those who desire it purely due to unjust social conditions. Finally, I have 6 suggestions for solutions. 1, establishing an epistemic injustice task force. So to address exclusion from participating in the epistemic projects of academia, I propose the creation of a task force focused on researching and understanding epistemic injustice. This task force should have capacity to pursue original research that involves both data collection and the production of conceptual resources. And this is because epistemic justice is itself an under-researched area, especially with respect to more marginalized groups. 2, responsibility and accountability. Universities must assume responsibility for the harm caused by inaccessibility and be held accountable for that harm. Transparent practices and policies will be crucial to fostering this culture of accountability. 3, collaboration with disability-led organizations and advocates. These collaborations can inform policies, improve support systems, and ensure the voices of those with lived experience are heard and hopefully valued. The disability-led training and support, comprehensive training for all staff is necessary to foster understanding of autistic and other neurodivergent or disability-related differences. 5, hiring autistic, neurodivergent, and otherwise disabled faculty. The inclusion of diverse faculty members, including autistic and neurodivergent individuals, is necessary to address implicit or unconscious biases that, again, can't be addressed by training. Additionally, research that lacks consideration of diverse perspectives is, in my opinion, often deficient, and as such, universities without diverse faculty create a lot of limited and/or incorrect research. 6, research support. Universities should actively support investigations into under-researched areas related to disability experiences. This should include funding and resources for researchers who have faced barriers in academia, including those who are forced out of academia at any point at all on their education journey. Finally, I would like to add that making decisions based on merit in pursuing any of these solutions would exclude people with valuable lived experience. Merit-based systems create a selection bias, filtering out those who face more extensive barriers. Thank you.
Nathan, thank you for being extremely vulnerable and sharing your story. I think this highlights how barriers and also, like you said, ostracism leads to significant mental health problems. And we need to address these issues, not just rely on training as the endpoint, but again, a lot of the solutions that many people point out that we can start moving things forward, bringing the community involved, bringing activists involved, and looking at these things with an actual EDI lens that includes accessibility to ensure that we're not leaving out members of the disability community from being a part of institutions, being professors, or leading the way. So thank you again, Nathan. Speaker is Sarai. So Sarai, go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
All right. So I'm actually really glad I ended up being last, because that means that all my other panelists got to touch on issues in my speech, and I get to extrapolate them even more so. So originally this speech, my little spiel was called Factors Behind Ableism, but I realized there were too many to narrow it down. So what I did instead was I am going to discuss slight differences between undergraduate and graduate students and how 2 in particular factors affect how ableism will affect them. First, the one that is going to affect both of them equally is that society has decided that it is still socially acceptable to judge, discriminate, and belittle the disabled in any way, shape, or form, so long as they find it amusing. Even if some cases they will say, and they will uphold that it is a form of discrimination or bias, the fact of the matter is that their society, in particular North America, has decided that it is still socially acceptable to allow such instances to occur simply because they think our existence is worthy of mocking and is fuel for their own entertainment. Secondly, everyone, the students, the most vulnerable students in particular, have, for some reason, been found that we must lose our right to privacy should we try to get care via either extremely invasive documentation procedures or simply having to continuously come out just so that we can accept and get the accommodations we so desperately need. There's also the issue, in particular, because academia has pushed forward ableism and eugenics policy, that the school and society does have a double empathy problem, which is a term coined back in 2012, meaning that in the autistic field, where autistic individuals have difficulty socializing with non-autistic individuals due in part to the lack of mutual understanding between the 2 groups, and vice versa. This is seen across any 2 groups with significantly different identities. The 2 groups are going to have trouble sympathizing and empathizing with members outside of them. And yet society has decided that when you are disabled, it is your duty to over accommodate for those who are not. Lastly, and you can see this very well when you're reading Western's policy either on EDI appeals or accommodations appeals, it is neurotypical experiences that actually determine policies and expectations when in classes. Right now, if a student at Western were to try to make an appeal for their professor to accept their accommodations, professors who are not in a position to determine if a student should have an accommodation in the first place, the guiding documentation says to ensure they have the energy to actually finish the process, because it might not be accessible to them, as well as the school cannot protect the students from academic repercussions should they choose to file an appeal. Even if this is rewritten in the documentation, I still hear to this day of how students still have to face this barrier. So what is the second factor I want to look at? And it actually has to do with academia. People forget that Western is a research institution, and research institutions are globalized fleets. If one institution steps either behind or in front of the line, that can cost them in terms of their global standing, funding, collaboration. And if they do any of that, that can affect their overall ranking and the professors that they're able to maintain, including the ones who want to assist us. While undergraduate students feel the brunt in terms of they are treated much more like a business transaction to push in and out as quickly as possible, graduate students feel the brunt of this system, having to deal with research culture, or how researchers are expected to behave and what conditions they are and are not allowed to have, because graduate students are directly tied to supervisors and thus institutions' funding and future grant possibilities. That was my clock. We all have accommodations. Graduate students at Western also unfortunately have the position where they are neither students nor employees. So they must balance this strange line of having some programs and services taken away or given to them simply based on whether it will benefit the school. Both of these are terrible. And the solutions for the academia one is simply for Western to reach out and be proactive. A difficult choice, I know, since proactivity actually means they want to change. But they must be proactive and find other universities who are trying to combat the ableism that is in research culture, to allow there to be a place for the disabled amongst their ranks. And they must do away with the students' self-advocacy they impose on students, and must be made to be self-accountable. Anything less will cause students to move away. But disabled students are tired of having to fight every day for their own basic needs. They must install a new research assessment reform, as many other universities are currently doing, such that the metrics of publications and funding are not the only ones that grant supervisors and professors their funding and grants. They must look to evaluate how professors are handling EDI approaches, mental health, and how they are teaching their students. I want to end by saying that while there are problems with Western and how it is educating students, we cannot forget that Western, by virtue of being a research institution, has also been roped in to all of the elitism and ableism of that culture. And so to see proper change, we must also account and help. Western, my mistake, not us, we have done enough. Western needs to account and be proactive.
Thank you, Sarai. I think it's really interesting how you spoke about professors having to be the ones that approve our accommodations. And I wish that academia as a whole would understand that the professors are professionals in their field and students are experts in their disabilities just as much as professors are in their fields, and it should be respected that way. We're going to start with a question on how ableism and inaccessibility impacted the education experience, both academically, professionally, and personally. How have they impacted your mental health and overall well-being? Let's toss it over to Naomi again. Okay. Whoever wants to do that can go.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think some of the people on the panel have more significant things to say about that, and that I want to leave that space for those conversations.
Thank you. Any takers? I know some of you have already touched on it about the burden that self-advocacy has had on them and isolation and ostracization has had on them.
The overall impact of my experience has been to essentially force me into a position where I think finding a suitable career in academia or ending my life being made are my only real options, and it is looking more and more likely that finding a career in academia at all is not going to happen. Difficulty finding employment during my education resulted in excess of teaching assistant positions on my CV. Despite seeking advice and assistance from employment agencies and other sources, it took 2 years for me to find a job at all after graduating. And it was the first job that I ever, was hired for at age 40. So now my limited social life means that finding fulfilling work with like-minded colleagues is all the more important. Combined with my background, my interests, my now intense desire to avoid philosophy of science have narrowed my options to a disability-oriented academic career, despite lacking formal background in that area. Ostracism and its negative impact on my mental health have hindered my participation in social aspects of graduate school, preventing me from adding valuable experiences to my CV, which would be useful for both academic or non-academic positions. Poor mental health and financial instability makes it challenging to compensate for these missed opportunities. So I've eventually come to the conclusion that my life either depends on Western taking responsibility for the harm that they've caused, or in other universities recognizing the capitalistic flaws of merit-based hiring and offering alternative paths to fulfilling academic careers, so that not so many of disabled people are end up being forced out due to the ableism we experienced during our degree programs.
Would it be all right if I hop on afterwards? And that's because I kind of want to touch on this, and that is another thing about graduate students is that the future of the graduate student is directly tied to the supervisor. So as Nathan has said, if you can't get those experiences or even a supervisor reference, your future with an academic position is gone. So graduate students now have to deal not only with the power imbalance of just being supervisor employee, but the power imbalance that the supervisor can literally take away your future should they choose to. And it could be for something as small as you brought the wrong lunch to what we are seeing with is you are a disabled student. And there is unfortunately some that I've said it, but I probably should have gone more in my speech, but the elitism of research institutions and academia is quite literally, if we let these disabled people in here, it will make us lesser people by virtue of them being on the same platform as us. So some professors will just not let them through simply because of that.
So my experience with that, it's working, right? My experience with that is actually still ongoing. During my time in Western, on the kind of a repeated pattern, I found that paternalism and a decision that if an instructor decides to not fulfill and require accommodation, then I'm probably in the wrong as a student, but that's actually not the case. And when I started thinking about it and actually started discussing it, the reply that I got back was less than reasonable. So, for example, when I said to a specific person that in order for equity to be maintained, or at least not as harmed as it would have been otherwise, to complete a certain course in a specific timeline of 2 to 3 months, the reply that I received back was that, how about a year? It falls short in a number of ways. One of them is also the timeliness of an accommodation. The duty to accommodate actually involves that, and it's actually something that's been very clearly ironed out from case law. If an accommodation that isn't provided on time is, practically speaking, not an accommodation, which is very strongly related to the simple idea that if a solution has no impact on the outcome, so the outcome is exactly the same or nearly exactly the same, whether the solution is there or not there, maybe that's not the solution. Maybe it's not good enough. Maybe there needs to be a second thought here. And unfortunately, when this is something that I've stated, and I've said it a number of times, just no listening. People just decided that it's not important enough to listen, and it's paternalism, and it's a bit ridiculous. So that's something that I personally experience and still am experiencing on a very regular basis, including even as late as this month. So that's my spiel.
Thank you. Ben, do you have anything to add?
No, sorry, I made a little thumbs up, but I feel like that was great. I don't have anything to add for this one.
I think this might be our last question given our time, but and I'm gonna direct it at Ben first, so they can get in first. How can academic institutions better incorporate the voices and perspectives of disabled students in the decision-making process to ensure their needs are adequately represented?
Yeah, I can absolutely speak to that. Something that I found happened to me a lot at King's is after I was harmed or after another student was harmed, after an incident had already happened, there was no real system for accountability. And if there was, it was like 3 steps ahead of what students were comfortable with or aware of. So it would be like, call the ombudsperson, and that's not something that, like, I'm a returning student. This is my second time around with school. So I've had some time outside of academia to understand how I want to be treated and how I want other people to treat me. But I found with so many of my peers, the environment of the school was so normalized that they would be mistreated that they weren't comfortable trying to look for accountability. They weren't comfortable trying to follow up after they had been quite seriously harmed. So I say all that to say, I think it's in that situation when a student is looking for accountability that usually a student's voice is incorporated into how can we change these systems. So I went into a lot of meetings with administration, a lot of meetings with people, and I would always be asked, okay, what's your opinion? What's your suggestion? What's your solution? And I think, not to de-emphasize the importance of students being included, because we really do know our own experience, and academia has changed so much since our peers who are 5 years graduated ahead of us, or our faculty. Academia has changed so much that we really have a unique experience that other people might not experience. So it's important that our perspective is heard, but we're also not educational design experts for the most part, or suddenly we're, like one of my panelists said, we're an expert in a different field and asked to be an expert in disability studies just because we are ourselves disabled. So I feel like it really is necessary to bring in these outsiders, these other stakeholders who can hold the university accountable and offer them this wealth of knowledge, implement those solutions that we already have, instead of time and time again bringing in a student and asking them to do an immense amount of labor, almost never compensated, on top of the work that they're doing, to try to get their accommodations or just account for being a disabled person in an extremely inaccessible environment. All of that labor falling on them, having been the party who was harmed, now trying to find a solution that they themselves probably will never even get to experience the benefit of, because it'll be implemented maybe 10 years after they've graduated. So that's, I think we need to be really careful how we include students, and really aware of how many resources are out there that we could also be calling on in collaboration with that.
Do you have something to add, Naomi? Would you like to add to that, or?
Yeah, so thinking about the ways that academic institutions can better incorporate the voices and perspectives of disabled students. I think that something that Ben spoke to earlier was the idea that, yes, sort of why is it disabled students' responsibility to fix the ableism within the academy? I know that when things are inaccessible, that is a problem but it's not a problem created by us, if that makes sense, right? Within occupational therapy, we talk about a thing called occupation. We don't mean job, we mean anything that occupies your time. And navigating accessibility systems is an occupation, right? It takes time. And I think that listening is important. Yeah. But I also think that being in a position where they're also taking accountability and responsibility and doing their own research about ways to improve things is important, because the burden of labor, as been said earlier, shouldn't necessarily be on the students who are trying to also be full-time, right, and work on their academics. I think I could leave with a couple of questions. Are accessibility accommodation services accessible? I think that's a big question to think about. How much time do they take? And then also, we saw some wonderful graphs, right? I think that incorporating universal design for learning, or even simpler, just something called accessibility basics, that's context dependent. I don't know what the accessibility basics would be for a given program, but what's that first tiny step? Maybe it's working on adding actual headings to documents. But I don't think that's a big ask, but I'll put that forward. But I think that it's more about the accessibility first as philosophy, not a checklist. Oh, accessibility first. Okay, what's the first baby step? What's our first tiny win? Figuring out what that accessibility basic is and then bringing that to life. I think would mean that then students don't have to go and make micro accommodation requests and clog the official accommodation system with all of these tiny requests. Like, hey, I would like this schedule that I've been given to be put forward in an accessible document. Oh, okay, but I have to email my advisor about that. Like, that shouldn't be clogging the system. I guess the real last thing I'll say is I recognize and acknowledge that professors in many instances are in spaces where they haven't been trained in how to do these things from an accessible perspective. And I think that ethical resourcing leads to ethical pedagogy in a lot of spaces. So I think this will be best served as a teamwork approach. Nothing about us without us, but there also has to be the without us part.
So I very much agree with what Finn said earlier. There's so much good work out there on what can be done, and universities just aren't listening. So I do have a list of things here that I could read. Again, it's things that have been said at conferences like this over and over again for decades. So really the only thing I want to say is that disabled students and faculty shouldn't merely be consultants whose perspectives can be ignored when the university finds it convenient, but partners with power and authority, particularly with respect to any issues that disproportionately affect the disabled community. Yeah, I think that's basically all I have to say here. Sharing of power and authority, rather than just treating disabled students, faculty, or outside resource organizations simply as consultants.
So there are a lot of different ways that students would like to participate. I'm sure it's very individual kind of thing. Some students would like to participate more or able to participate more. Some would like or are able to participate less. And I think it's important to really put the best foot forward of the system by listening and taking action based on the information that is available. But that means actually doing that. And that's until very recently, at least, I haven't really found that happening. A specific point that Finn made about going to the Ombudsman. From personal experience, the reply I received was, "We can't help you." I didn't receive it once. I actually received it a good number of times, maybe as much as a dozen times. But it's something that I just got on repeat, and it really speaks towards the need for a consistent, clear kind of system to allow us as students with disabilities to actually have accountability and actually have our needs met. And that system doesn't need to be complicated. That system, if it is complicated, it's probably not going to work. But a simple system basically says, okay, how can we address the issue? And that's it. It doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to go around the bush. It doesn't need to be bureaucratized beyond belief, because those things usually what they cause is inaccess instead of accessibility. On the same vein, that will also speak towards increasing the need, increasing responsibility and taking responsibility for one's mistakes, and it goes for everyone involved, with students and faculty and staff, because humans make mistakes. That's kind of what we do. So it will really help with actually taking that responsibility and taking those actions, and of course the accountability that comes with responsibility. And as an example of that, something that I already gave feedback about, but just completely brushed off, there is the memory aid issue, right? A memory aid is something that some students need, not all students, but some students need. Some instructors actually give it. This is a universal thing. And one of those very specific examples is that one of the criteria the Western poses for receiving that is that specifically the assessment needs to state that it's up to the professor. Well, with all due respect to the professors, again, that's just not their job. My professors are almost entirely computer scientists, and with all due respect to them, I'm not made of zeros and ones. So, and while I understand their love for the subject, I have that too. Again, there's a need to kind of be realistic about what their abilities and skills and expertise are at. And at the same time, not all experts are equal. specifically referring to the memory aid point, the person who actually developed it is in Queen's University. And unfortunately, some of her opinions that I've read on her research made me very uncomfortable. I'm going to just end with that. And by that, I'm saying that those 6 or 7 criteria that currently Western are using are probably not the best 6 or 7 criteria to be using. And that means that with those criteria, while it's important to have criteria, and I don't think that accommodation should just be given out willy-nilly. That's not going to solve anything. That's just going to create a cluster. But instead, what it needs to happen is that these criteria needs to be thought out and actually justified in a way that actually justifies it and is not made out of excuses that are just made by someone who just wants to work with the institution that they work with, so the institution likes them. That's not the goal here.
Great, thank you. I think we're out of time, but I would love to thank all of my I would love to thank all of my fellow students and panelists. I think this conversation has really shone a light on how voices need to be heard, and this was an excellent opportunity for our voices to be heard, and hopefully Western and Fanshawe and the rest of the London academia community will hear our voices at this point. Thank you.
I literally just feel so bad to end this panel. Thank you all. I can't even see you over the monitor. But thank you so much, everyone, for just sharing your lived experience, for being so open and honest and vulnerable. And I love what you said about this being a platform for you to voice your opinions, put some pressure on Western, Fanshawe, every other School of Kings, where we are at right now. But thank you so much for being here. And I'll hand it over to Action for some closing remarks. Feel free to awkwardly still sit on the stage, awkwardly make your way out. Either way, it's going to be weird for everyone. So I'll just embrace that. I'll hand it over to Action. Oh, so okay. Oh, slay. Have at it.
So just a few thoughts coming off of the last panel. I love how Naomi mentioned occupation, and I just jokingly mentioned to many people when I do talks like this, or even when I mentor, I tell people I have 2 full-time jobs and a part-time job. And the part-time job is the fun stuff in life. The full-time job, one of the full-time jobs is usually navigating systems and advocating and fighting and fighting and fighting. The other full-time job is managing my chronic illness and, again, navigating the healthcare system and advocating and advocating and advocating. And although we're talking about this in the post-secondary environment and moving forward with our education and what can be done, we also have to think about the broader society. Many people with disabilities are navigating a challenging, accessible transit system. We're fighting to find accessible, affordable housing. We're trying to get jobs that don't see us as a burden, but with people with abilities and have valuable contributions to make to society. We are trying to reform the health system so that way we can get the things we need so we can thrive and survive in life. So when we think about the burden that is often placed on students, faculty, and staff with disability to move the needle forward, it's a lot because we're carrying that burden of everything else that we're going through in society, and it's a lot. So while I heard a lot about accountability, and it's important, I think we need community accountability to hold institutions accountable and push them to do the right thing. But at the same time, institutions need to value integrity. If we believe in equity, diversity, inclusion, decolonization, accessibility, the thriving of students, faculty, and staff, their mental health and well-being, their valuable contributions to the world. As institutions, they need to put it upon themselves to hold themselves to a higher standard. They have the resources, the power, they have the decision-making capabilities. They are making strategic plans. These things can be the focus of their goals. So that way, when they say that Western is a place for all, or a place to belong, or a place to thrive, or any institution here in London, if they're living up to integrity, they can live up to those goals. So I want to thank everyone because it was a joint effort from the Society of Graduate Students, especially our VP academic who's at NEADS, And a shout out to Elizabeth's Balloons. A really great shout out to NEADS. It's been a joy working with you all. I love your zest, your energy. I'm going to be sending you so much positive vibes and energy for the next 2 years as you travel across Canada again. I want to give a special shout out to our SOGS communication manager, Heidi. I know she's not here, but she has gone above and beyond for promoting this event throughout our social medias, emails, and just getting balloons together. And I do want to give a special thank you to our staff and faculty panel members. They provided so much knowledge, and that's the thing. A lot of these research institutions have the experts available to help them move things forward. So I'm glad they were here to share what can be done, what is helpful. And a special thank you to our student and recent graduate panel. These are tough stories to share, and being vulnerable is a tough thing, but I'm glad that you guys were able to put your voice forward and share your solutions, but also being able to, I'm missing the word, but the word I'm trying to think about is just bring the conversation about the burden, the grief, and a lot of the pain that many of us go through and goes unrecognized. And that, as been mentioned, sorry, friend, I'm going to keep giving you a shout out, that we need to take time and space for that grief. And that we are also able to reevaluate how we sacrifice ourselves to move things forward. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for taking the time to listen. Thank you to our online participants. I know there's a lot more that we wanted to talk about like how do we best support, our staff and faculty with disabilities. Where these resources come from, unpaid labor that goes on, again, for people advocating and doing the work, the emotional labor, and constantly being consultants, or even when we're co-collaborators, we're often not, that labor is not recognized as work and being worthy of compensation. So again, thank you all for being here and being allies and supporters in this project, and thanks. Did I spell enough for a raffle? Or Jonathan?
While we're figuring that out, give it up for Ashton one more time, because I feel like we need it. Yeah. Got it ready? We don't have time to screen share. I'm going to ad lib now. It's what we all feared. It's happening anyways. Elizabeth has balloons. I've never seen so much joy. Thank you, Elizabeth. Wow, what an event. It's very gloomy in London. Lots of rain for our online participants. Classic London, Ontario. Worst weather of my life. Literally being here brings me physical pain because of the barometric pressure and my arthritis. Yet another reason to make fun of London, Ontario. You know how it is. I am still stalling. Oh, did someone post that? I don't think anyone posted. Why don't we? Some events last forever, especially in your heart, but also when you do the raffle, not during the event, because we need to finish the logistics and make sure everyone gets a chance. So online participants will be at you with a link. In-person people, stay tuned, because we have your contact info and we'll find you if you win. If not, you can go about your lives. I think that's it for my ominous threats. They're not threats, by the way. Oh, gotcha. And I think that's it. Anything else? Going once, going twice? Thank you everyone so much for what was supposed to be the last stop on the State of the Schools tour. 2 more years. 2 more years. No, 2. Okay, I'll take it.
With raffle winners that are online, we will email you, and then also those in person will either get their gift in person or they'll be emailed with their Amazon gift card. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Yeah, that's it. It's over.